Have you ever sat quietly after a phone call with your child and felt that strange heaviness in your chest? Not because anything terrible was said, but because something just felt off. Maybe the conversation was shorter than you expected. Maybe their tone felt distant. Or maybe you found yourself replaying something you said, wondering if you should have said it differently. If that feeling sounds familiar, you're not alone. So many women in this stage of life carry a quiet kind of ache when it comes to their relationships with their children. You spent years loving them, raising them, protecting them, sacrificing for them. And now, somehow, the relationship feels more complicated than it used to be. Not broken, not lost, but different. And sometimes a little fragile. The truth is, most conflicts between parents and adult children don't come from a lack of love. In fact, they often come from love that's still there, but expressed in ways that no longer fit the relationship as it has grown. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because the relationship between a mother and her child doesn't end when that child becomes an adult. It simply changes. And if we can learn how to adjust with that change, something beautiful happens. The tension softens, the distance shrinks, and a new kind of closeness begins to grow, one built not on control, but on respect, trust, and peace. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine your relationship with your child not as something you have to hold tightly, but as something you gently support. Like a tree offering shade, always there, always steady, but never blocking the sunlight. That's where we begin, because one of the most important shifts we can make, one that changes everything, is learning how to be present in our children's lives, without becoming overbearing. Now, this can be surprisingly difficult. When you've spent decades being the one who makes sure everything is okay, it doesn't feel natural to step back. You're used to checking in, giving reminders, offering solutions, noticing what's wrong before anyone else does. That instinct doesn't just disappear because your child turns 30 or 40. But here's the gentle truth. What once felt like care can sometimes start to feel like pressure. Your child may still love you deeply. They may still need you in ways they don't always say out loud, but they also need space to live their life on their own terms. And when that space is respected, something very important happens. They begin to come back to you not out of obligation, but because they want to. Think about it this way. Have you ever been around someone who means well, but is always asking questions, always offering advice, always stepping in? Even when they're kind, it can feel overwhelming. It can make you want to pull back just to breathe. Our children feel that too. Being present doesn't mean being involved in every detail. It means being available. It means letting them know, through your tone, your actions, and your silence, I'm here if you need me, but I trust you to handle your life. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, just listening, just being there, just letting them lead the conversation. And that brings us to something just as important, learning to truly respect your children as adults. This might sound obvious at first. Of course you respect them, you might say. But respect, in this stage of life, takes on a deeper meaning. It means recognizing that your child is no longer someone you guide, but someone you relate to. They have their own thoughts, their own values, their own ways of doing things, and sometimes those ways will be different from yours. Not wrong, just different. And that difference can be hard to accept. You might look at a decision they've made and think, I wouldn't have done it that way. You might feel the urge to correct, to suggest, to steer them in what you believe is a better direction. That urge comes from love. But if it's not handled carefully, It can come across as doubt, and no adult wants to feel like their parent doesn't trust their judgment. Respect in this sense is not about agreeing with everything your child does. It's about allowing them the dignity to choose their own path, even when that path includes mistakes. Because mistakes are not failures. They are part of growing, no matter how old we are. And when your child knows that you respect their choices, something beautiful begins to happen. They start to open up more. They start to share not because they have to, but because they feel safe. Safe from judgment, safe from correction, safe to simply be themselves. Let me share something simple, but powerful. The next time your child tells you about a decision they've made, especially one you're unsure about, pause for a moment before responding. Instead of offering advice right away, try saying something like, "That sounds important to you. How are you feeling about it? Do you feel the difference in that?" You're not stepping in, you're stepping closer. You're showing interest, not control. Curiosity, not correction. And that small shift can change the entire tone of your relationship. Because at the end of the day, what most adult children truly want from their parents is not direction, but understanding. Now, as we continue this conversation, there's another layer to this that becomes even more delicate, especially when your children have built families of their own. When your children begin building lives of their own, marriages, homes, families, the relationship naturally stretches into new territory. And this is where many loving mothers find themselves walking a very fine line, because your heart is still the same. You still want to protect, to guide, to make things easier for them. But their world now includes other voices, other rhythms, other ways of doing things. And sometimes, those ways don't look anything like the way you would have done them. Maybe it's how they raise their children. Maybe it's how they manage their home. Maybe it's how they handle their relationships. And if we're honest, there can be moments when you quietly think, "That's not how I would do it." That thought is human. It's natural. But what we do with that thought, that's what determines whether the relationship stays peaceful or begins to carry tension. Because one of the most important principles in this stage of life is learning to avoid excessive interference. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to protect the relationship. There's a difference between being supportive and being involved in ways that weren't invited. And sometimes that difference is felt more than it is spoken. A daughter may never say, "Mom, you're interfering." A son may never express that he feels pressured. But over time, small moments can build up. Comments here, suggestions there, and slowly they create distance. Not because love is gone, but because space is missing. And space in adult relationships is just as important as connection. This becomes especially delicate when it comes to your child's marriage or partner, because now you're not just relating to your child, you're also navigating a new person who holds a central place in their life, and that can stir up emotions you didn't expect. You might feel protective, you might feel unsure, you might even feel a little left out at times. But here's something deeply important to remember. Your child's relationship is sacred ground. It's not a place for correction, judgment, or comparison. It's a place where your role gently shifts from guiding to respecting. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to fully understand every choice. But offering respect, especially when it's not easy, builds trust in ways that criticism never will. When your child feels that you honor their relationship, even quietly, they feel supported rather than divided. And that sense of support strengthens your bond with them far more than any advice ever could. Now, Alongside this idea of stepping back, there's another principle that often gets overlooked, and yet it carries so much weight: giving without conditions. As mothers, giving has always been part of who you are. You've given your time, your energy, your love, your resources, and in many ways, that giving continues into later life, helping with grandchildren, offering financial support, being there in times of need. But sometimes, without even realizing it, giving can become tied to expectation, not always spoken, but quietly felt. A hope that your child will visit more often, a desire for appreciation, a wish that they'll listen more closely, respond more warmly, agree more easily. And when those expectations aren't met, something inside can feel hurt. You might think, after everything I've done, that feeling is real, and it deserves compassion. But here's where a gentle shift can bring peace. When giving is truly free, without expectation of return, it becomes lighter. It becomes something that brings joy rather than disappointment. Because the moment giving is tied to control, it changes the nature of the relationship. Your child may begin to feel that love comes with conditions, that support has strings attached, that closeness requires a certain kind of behavior. And even if that's not your intention, that's how it can be experienced. But when your giving is offered simply because you choose to give, because it feels right in your heart, it creates something entirely different. It creates gratitude, not pressure. It creates warmth, not distance. And perhaps most importantly, it allows your child to come closer to you freely, without feeling like they owe something in return. Now, there's another quiet pattern that often shows up in these relationships, one that can seem small in the moment, but carries a powerful impact over time. The desire to be right. You've lived a full life. You've gathered wisdom, experience, insight. And often you truly do see things more clearly than your children might in certain situations. So when a disagreement arises, it can feel natural to stand your ground, to explain your point, to make sure they understand, to correct what feels off. But here's the question that can gently shift everything. Is it more important to be right or to be at peace? Because in many situations, holding tightly to being right can create a kind of invisible wall, not loud, not dramatic, but felt. Your child may stop sharing as openly. They may avoid certain topics. They may choose silence over conversation, not because they don't value your opinion, but because they don't want to feel corrected every time they speak. Letting go of the need to always be right doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means choosing connection over control. It means allowing room for different perspectives to exist without needing to win the conversation. Sometimes peace in a relationship is not found in proving a point, but in simply allowing the moment to pass with kindness. You can still hold your beliefs. You can still think differently. But you don't always have to make it known in every situation. And when your child feels that freedom, that they can speak without being corrected or debated, they begin to relax in your presence. They begin to trust that being around you won't turn into a quiet argument. And that trust, that ease, is what brings people closer over time. As you sit with these ideas, you may start to notice something subtle but powerful. None of these principles are about losing your role as a mother. They're about transforming it, from guiding to supporting, from directing to listening, from holding tightly to holding gently. And in that transformation, something new begins to grow. A relationship that isn't built on obligation, but on genuine connection. And as we move deeper into this conversation, there are a few more quiet shifts, simple but deeply meaningful, that can soften even the most strained relationships and bring a sense of closeness that feels natural again. There are a few more gentle shifts that, over time, can completely change the atmosphere between you and your child. They're not dramatic. They don't require big conversations or difficult confrontations, but they carry a quiet kind of power, the kind that softens walls and opens doors. One of those shifts begins with something so simple, yet so often overlooked: listening with genuine attention. Now you might be thinking, of course I listen to my children, and I believe you do. But there's a difference between hearing words and truly listening. Many of us, especially as mothers, have spent years listening with the intention to help, to fix, to guide, to offer something useful. But sometimes what your child needs most is not a solution, it's space. Space to speak without interruption. Space to express something without it being corrected or redirected. Space to feel understood without being analyzed. Think about the last time your child shared something personal with you. Maybe it was about their work, their relationship, or a struggle they were facing. As they spoke, did you feel an urge to respond quickly, to offer advice, to help them see a better way? That instinct comes from love. But if we're not careful, it can quietly shift the conversation away from them and back toward us. True listening asks something different of us. It asks us to slow down, to stay present, to hear not only the words but the feeling behind them. Sometimes that means allowing a pause, letting a silence sit without rushing to fill it, nodding, acknowledging, simply being there. And when you do respond, it can be as simple as, "That sounds really hard," or "I'm glad you told me." Do you feel how gentle that is? You're not taking over. You're not correcting. You're simply meeting them where they are. And in that space, something important happens. Your child begins to feel safe opening up again, because they're not worried about being judged. They're not bracing for advice. They're not preparing to defend their choices. They're just sharing. And over time, that kind of listening becomes a bridge, a quiet path that brings you closer together again. Now, closely connected to this is another habit that can either strengthen or strain the relationship. Offering advice. Advice can be helpful. It can be wise. It can even be exactly what someone needs at the right moment. But timing matters, and so does permission. Unsolicited advice, even when it's well-meaning, can sometimes feel like criticism in disguise. Your child might hear, "You should do this," and quietly translate it into, "You're doing it wrong." And that feeling, even if it's subtle, can create resistance. They may stop sharing certain things. They may avoid asking for your opinion altogether, not because they don't value your wisdom, but because they don't want to feel corrected. So here's a small but powerful shift. Before offering advice, pause. Ask yourself, have they asked for my input? Are they open to hearing this right now? And if you're unsure, you can gently ask, would you like my thoughts on that, or do you just need me to listen? That one question can change everything, because now you're giving them a choice. You're respecting their space. And when people feel that kind of respect, they're much more open to hearing what you have to say. Sometimes they'll say, "Yes, I'd love your advice." And in that moment, your words will land softly because they were invited. Other times, they may just want to talk, and that's okay too. Because being someone your child feels comfortable talking to, that's far more valuable than being someone who always has the right answer. Now, as we move into this final shift, it touches something deeper, something that many mothers carry quietly in their hearts. accepting that your children have lives of their own. This can be one of the hardest transitions of all, because for so many years, your life and theirs were closely intertwined. Their needs shaped your days. Their presence filled your home. Their voices, their routines, their energy. It was all part of your world. And then, slowly, things changed. They grew up. They moved out. They built lives that don't always include you in the same way. And sometimes that absence can feel like distance, even when it's simply the natural unfolding of life. You might find yourself wishing they called more, visited more, shared more. You might wonder, why don't they reach out the way they used to? And in those moments, it's easy to feel hurt or forgotten. But here's a gentle truth that can bring a sense of peace. Your child's independence is not a rejection of you. It's a reflection of the life you helped them build. You raised them to think, to choose, to grow, to become their own person. And now they are doing exactly that. And yes, their world is fuller now. It includes responsibilities, relationships, challenges, and commitments that take their time and attention. But that doesn't mean there's no place for you. It simply means the relationship has changed shape. Instead of being at the center of their daily life, you become something equally meaningful, a place of comfort, of understanding, of calm, a place they can return to, not because they have to, but because they want to. And that return, when it comes freely, carries so much more depth. When you release the expectation of how often they should call, when you let go of measuring their love by their actions, something inside you softens. And in that softness, your presence becomes lighter, more inviting, more peaceful. And often, without even asking, you'll find that they begin to reach out in ways that feel more genuine, not out of obligation, but out of connection. Because relationships, especially in this stage of life, don't grow stronger through pressure. They grow stronger through freedom. As you reflect on all of this, I want you to remember something very important. You are not losing your role as a mother. You are evolving it into something deeper, more peaceful, more lasting, a relationship where love is no longer expressed through control or correction, but through presence, respect, and quiet understanding. And if any part of this resonated with you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. What has your experience been like with your children as they've grown older? What has been easy and what has been challenging? Share your story in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. And if you found comfort or clarity in this conversation, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Elderly Faith Journey. This is a space where we walk through life's later seasons together, with honesty, warmth, and wisdom. Remember, it's never too late to soften a relationship. It's never too late to listen more deeply, to love more gently, and to create a connection that feels peaceful for both of you. Here's to the kind of love that doesn't hold tightly, but holds wisely.